Through the dear might of him that walked the waves, through the dear might. Sounds like St. Francis. Turn over, Stephen said quietly. I don't see anything. What, sir? Talbot asked simply, bending forward. His hand turned the page over. He leaned back and went on again, having just remembered. Of him that walked the waves. Here also over these craven hearts his shadow lies, and on the scoffer's heart and lips, and on mine. It lies upon their eager faces who offered him a coin of the tribute. To Caesar what is Caesar's, to God what is God's. A long look from dark eyes, a riddling sentence to be woven and woven on the church's looms. Aye. Riddle me, Randy Rowe. My father gave me seeds to sow. Talbot slid his closed book into his satchel. Have I heard all? Stephen asked. Yes, sir. Hockey at 10, sir. Half day, sir, Thursday. Who can answer a riddle? Stephen asked. They bundled their books away, pencils clacking, pages rustling. Crowding together, they strapped and buckled their satchels, all gabbling gaily. A riddle, sir. Ask me, sir. Oh, ask me, sir. A hard one, sir. This is the riddle, Stephen said. The cock crew, the sky was blue. The bells in heaven were striking 11. 'Tis time for this poor soul to go to heaven. What is that? What, sir? Again, sir, we didn't hear. Their eyes grew bigger as the lines were repeated. After a silence, Cochrane said, What is it, sir? We give it up. Stephen, his throat itching, answered, The fox burying his grandmother under a holly bush. He stood up and gave a shout of nervous laughter, to which their cries echoed dismay. A stick struck the door, and a voice in the corridor called, Hockey! They broke asunder, sidling out of their benches, leaping them. Quickly they were gone, and from the lumber room came the rattle of sticks and clamor of their boots and tongues. Sargent, who alone had lingered, came forward slowly, showing an open copybook. His tangled hair and scraggy neck gave witness of unreadiness, and through his misty glasses weak eyes looked up pleading. On his cheek, dull and bloodless, a soft stain of ink lay, date-shaped, recent and damp as a snail's bed. He held out his copybook. The word sums was written on the headline. Beneath were slopping figures, and at the foot a crooked signature with blind loops and a blot. Cyril Sargent. His name was and sealed. Mr. Deasy told me to write them all again, he said, and show them to you, sir. Stephen touched the edges of the book. Futility. Do you understand how to do them now? He asked. Numbers 11 to 15, Sargent answered. Mr. Deasy said I was to copy them off the board, sir. Can you do them yourself? Stephen asked. No, sir. Ugly and futile. Lean neck and tangled hair and a stain of ink. A snail's bed. Yet someone had loved him, borne him in her arms and in her heart. But for her, the race of the world would have trampled him underfoot, a squashed, boneless snail. She had loved his weak, watery blood drained from her own. Was that then real? The only true thing in life? His mother's prostrate body, the fiery Columbanus, in holy zeal bestrode. She was no more. The trembling skeleton of a twig burnt in the fire. The trembling skeleton of a twig burnt in the fire, an odor of rosewood and wetted ashes. She had saved him from being trampled underfoot, and had wetted ashes, and had gone, scarcely having been. A poor soul gone to heaven, and on a heath beneath winking stars, a fox, red reek of rapine in his fur, with merciless, bright eyes, scraped in the earth. Listen, scraped up the earth. Listen, scraped and scraped. Sitting at his side, Stephen solved out the problem. He proves by algebra that Shakespeare's ghost is Hamlet's grandfather. Sergeant peered askance through his slanted glasses. Hockey sticks rattled in the lumber room. The hollow knock of a ball and calls from the field. Across the page the symbols moved in grave Maurice. In the mummery of their letters, wearing quaint caps of squares and cubes. Give hands, traverse, bow to partner. So, imps of fancy of the moors. Gone too from the world, Averroes and Moses Maimonides, dark men in mien and movement, flashing in their mocking mirrors the obscure soul of the world. A darkness shining in brightness which brightness could not comprehend. Darkness shining in brightness which brightness could not comprehend. Do you understand now? Can you work the second for yourself? Yes, sir. In long, shaky strokes, Sergeant copied the data. Waiting always for a word of help, his hand moved faithfully the unsteady symbols, a faint hue of shame flickering behind his dull skin. Amor matrice. Subjective and objective genitive. With her weak blood and whey-sour milk, she had fed him and hid from sight of others his swaddling bands. Like him was I, these sloping shoulders, this gracelessness. My childhood bends beside me. Too far for me to lay a hand there once or lightly. Mine is far and his secret as our eyes. Secrets, silent, stony, sit in the dark palaces of both our hearts. Secrets weary of their tyranny, tyrants willing to be dethroned. The sum was done. It is very simple, Stephen said as he stood up. Yes, sir, Sergeant answered. He dried the page with a sheet of thin blotting paper and carried his copybook back to the desk. You had better get your stick and go out to the others, Stephen said, as he followed toward the door the boy's graceless form. Yes, sir. In the corridor his name was heard, called from the playfield. Sergeant! Run on, Stephen said. Mr. Deasy is calling you. He stood in the porch and watched the laggard hurry toward the scrappy field where sharp voices were in strife. They were sorted in teams, and Mr. Deasy kept stepping over wisps of grass with gaitered feet. When he had reached the schoolhouse, voices again contending called to him. He turned his angry white mustache. "What is it now?" he cried continually without listening. "Cochrane and Halliday are on the same side, sir," Stephen cried. "Will you wait in my study for a moment," Mr. Deasy said, "until I restore order here?" And as he stepped fussily back across the field, his old man's voice cried sternly, "What is the matter? What is it now?" Their sharp voices cried about him on all sides. Their many forms closed round him. The garish sunshine, bleaching the honey of his ill-dyed head. Stale, smoky air hung in the study with the smell of drab, abraded leather of its chairs. As on the first day he bargained with me here. As it was in the beginning, is now. On the sideboard the tray of Stuart coins, base treasure of a bog, and ever shall be. And snug in their spoon case of purple plush, faded, the 12 apostles, having preached to all the Gentiles, world without end. A hasty step over the stone porch and in the corridor, blowing out his rare moustache, Mr. Deasy halted at the table. "First, our little financial settlement," he said. He brought out of his coat a pocketbook bound by a leather thong. It slapped open, and he took from it 2 notes, one of joined halves, and laid them carefully on the table, strapping and 2, he said, strapping and stowing his pocketbook away. And now his strong room for the gold. Excuse me. Stephen's embarrassed hand moved over the shells kept in the cold stone mortar. Whelks and money cowries and leopard shells. And this, whirled as an emir's turban. And this, the scallop of St. James. An old pilgrim's hoard. Dead treasure. Hollow shells. A sovereign fell, bright and new, on the soft pile of the tablecloth. 3, Mr. Deasy said, turning his little savings box about in his hand. These are handy things to have. See, this is for sovereigns. Sorry. This is for shillings, 6 pences, half crowns, and here crowns. See? He shot from it 2 crowns and 2 shillings. 3.12, he said. I think you'll find that's right. Thank you, sir, Stephen said, gathering the money together with shy haste and putting it all in a pocket of his trousers. No thanks at all, Mr. Deasy said. You have earned it. Stephen's hand, free again, went back to the hollow shells. Symbols, too, of beauty and of power. A lump in my pocket. Symbols soiled by greed and misery. Don't carry it like that, Mr. Deasy said. You'll put it out somewhere and lose it. You just buy one of these machines. You'll find them very handy. Answer something. Mine would be often empty. Stephen said. The same room and hour, the same wisdom, and I the same. 3 times now. 3 nooses round me here. Well, I can break them in this instant if I will. Because you don't save, Mr. Deasy said, pointing his finger. You don't know yet what money is. Money is power. When you have lived as long as I have. I know. If youth but knew. But what does Shakespeare say? Pooh, put but money in thy purse. Iago, Stephen murmured. He lifted his gaze from the idle shells to the old man's stare. He knew what money was, Mr. Deasy said. He made money. A poet, but an Englishman, too. Do you know what is the pride of the English? Do you know what is the proudest word you will ever hear from an Englishman's mouth? The sea's ruler. His sea-cold eyes looked on the empty bay. History is to blame. On me and on my words, unhating. That on his empire, Stephen said. The sun never sets. That on his empire, the sun never sets. That's the proudest word you'll ever hear from an Englishman's mouth. Bah, Mr. Deasy cried. That's not English. A French Celt said that. He tapped his savings box against his thumbnail. I will tell you, he said solemnly, what is his proudest boast. I paid my way. Good man. I paid my way. I never borrowed a shilling in my life. Can you feel that? I owe nothing. Good man. I owe nothing. Can you? Mulligan. £9. 3 pairs of socks. 1 pair brogues, ties. Curon, 10 guineas. McCann, 1 guinea. Fred Ryan, 2 shillings. Temple, 2 lunches. Russell, 1 guinea. Cousins, 10 shillings. Bob Reynolds, half a guinea. Kohler, 3 guineas. Mrs. McKernan, 5 weeks' board. Board? The lump I have is useless. Sorry. For the moment, no, Stephen answered. Mr. Deasy laughed with rich delight, putting back his savings box. I knew you couldn't, he said joyously. But one day you must feel it. We are a generous people, but we must also be just. I fear those big words, Stephen said, which make us so unhappy. Mr. Deasy stared sternly for some moments over the mantelpiece at the shapely bulk of a man in tartan philibegs. Prince Albert Edward, Prince of Wales. You think me as an old fogey and an old Tory, his thoughtful voice said. I saw 3 generations since O'Connell's time. I remember the famine. Do you know that the Orange Lodges agitated for repeal of the Union 20 years before O'Connell did? Or before the prelates of your communion denounced him as a demagogue? Your Fenians forget some things. Glorious, pious, and immortal memory. The Lodge of Diamond in Armagh. The splendid behung with corpses of papishes. Horse, masked and armed, the Planters' Covenant. The Black North and True Blue Bible. Croppies lie down. Stephen sketched a brief gesture. I have rebel blood in me too, Mr. Deasy said, on the spindle side. But I am descended from Sir John Blackwood, who voted for the Union. We are all Irish, all kings' sons. Alas, Stephen said. Per vias rectas, Mr. Deasy said firmly, was his motto. He voted for it and put on his top boots to ride to Dublin, from the Ards of Down to do so. Lal the Ral the Ra, the rocky road to Dublin. A gruff squire on horseback with shiny top boots. Soft day, Sir John. Soft day, your honor. Day, day. 2 top boots jog dangling on to Dublin. Lal the Ral the Ra, lal the Ral the Ratty. That reminds me, Mr. Deasy said. You can do me a favor. Mr. Daedalus. You can do me a favor, Mr. Daedalus, with some of your literary friends. I have a letter here for the press. Sit down a moment. I have just copied the end. He went to the desk near the window, pulled in his chair twice, and read off some words from the sheet on the drum of his typewriter. Sit down. Excuse me, he said over his shoulder, the dictates of common sense. Just a moment. He peered from under his shaggy brows at the manuscript by his elbow, and, muttering, began to prod the stiff buttons of the keyboard slowly. He went to the desk near the window, pulled in his chair twice, and read off some words from the sheet on the drum of his typewriter. So they had typewriters. Sit down. Excuse me, he said over his shoulder, the dictates of common sense. Just a moment. He peered from under his shaggy brows at the manuscript by his elbow, and muttering, began to prod the stiff buttons of the keyboard slowly, sometimes blowing as he screwed up the drum to erase an error. So Deasy's typing. Stephen seated himself noiselessly before the princely presence. Framed around the walls, images of vanished horses stood in homage, their meek heads poised in air. Lord Hastings repulsed, the Duke of Westminster's shot over, the Duke of Beaufort's Ceylon, Prix de Paris, 1866. Elfin riders sat them, watchful of a sign. He saw their speeds, backing king's colors, and shouted with the shouts of vanished crowds. Full stop, Mr. Deasy bade his keys, but prompt ventilation of this important question. Where Cranley led me to get rich quick, hunting his winners among the mud-splashed brakes, amid the balls of bookies on their pitches and reek of the canteen, over the motley slush, even money fair rebel, 10 to 1